So our next unit is on factoring, and what we're going to start with is greatest common factor, and we're going to use this in every type of factoring. Factoring is going backwards from multiplying. So let's start off with just a definition. So greatest common factor is the largest number and or variables, so number and the variables, that all terms contain. And if you're looking to find the greatest common factor and you can't find anything other than 1, that means that it's prime. That means that you can't factor it. Okay, so let's talk about how to find the greatest common factor. So if you look at the very first page of your book, there's a list of factors. So if you're having trouble figuring out factors, you can use that table. So let's talk about how you would use that table. So your first step is that you're going to find both the factors on that table. Then you're going to look for the biggest factor that's in common to both of them, and that's going to be your greatest common factor. So let's say we were looking at 48 and 96. So if you go back and look at that page, for 48 it lists the factors as 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, 12, 16, 24, and 48. And then if you look at 96, it lists the factors as 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, 12, 16, 24, 32, 48, and 96. So what we're looking for is the biggest factor that's in both of them. So if we go through the list for 48 and for 96, you'll notice that 48 is in both of those. So that means the greatest common factor for 48 and 96 is 48. Okay, so let's look at an example. It says find the greatest common factor out of the polynomial. So what we're looking at is this polynomial right here. 12x squared plus 16x to the 5th. So we have a blank, and then we have this 3 plus 4x cubed. So in the blank is where we're going to fill in our greatest common factor. So we're going to look at our numbers first. So we're going to look at 12 and 16 and say what's the biggest number that goes into both 12 and 16. Same thing, if you're having trouble, you can go back and look at that chart. So if we look at the chart for 12, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12. For 16, we have 1, 2, 4, 8, and 16. So we want the biggest number that's in both sets, which would be this 4. So our greatest common factor for 12 and 16 is going to be 4. Then we're going to look and say what variable did they both have? And they both have this x. So we're going to put an x, and we're going to take the smallest x. So what's smaller, x squared or x to the 5th? So x squared is smaller, so we're going to put that out for our greatest common factor. Now what we're really doing here when we find greatest common factor for this polynomial, if you look, what we had before looks like this answer. So that means that we should be able to multiply this back in and get what we started with. So 4x squared times 3 is 12x squared, and 4x squared times 4x to the 3rd is 16x to the 5th. So there's our final answer. Okay, so next example we have 15a plus 100a to the 4th. So we're going to fill in the blank for our greatest common factor. So we're going to look at 15 and 100. So if we look at our factors of 15, we have 1, 3, 5, and 15. If we look at our factors of 100, they're 1, 2, 4, 5, 20, 25, 50, and 100. So we want the biggest factor that's in common to both, which looks like it's going to be a 5. We're going to put a 5. Then we're going to look at our variables. So what variable do they have in common? They both have an a. So we're going to put an a with our 5 and say which a is smaller. So remember, this one's a 1 and this one's a 4. So the smallest one's a to the 1st. So our answer is just 5a. Then if we want to check ourselves to see if we're correct, we can multiply this back in. So 5a times 3 is 15a. 5a times 20a to the third. So 5 times 20 is 100, and a to the third is a to the fourth. So there's our final answer. Okay, so the next example looks a little bit different because this time we have 3 terms and we have 2 different variables that we need to look at. So let's start with our coefficients. So our coefficients, we have a 7 from the 7c cubed. We have a 28 from the negative 28c squared d. And then we have a 35 from the 35cd cubed. So our factors of 7 are 1 and 7. For 28, the factors are 1, 2, 4, 7, 14, and 28. And the factors of 35 are 1, 5, 7, and 35. So we need the biggest factor to all 3, which is going to be 7. So our greatest common factor for the coefficients is 7. Then we're going to go back and we're going to look at variables. So we have a c cubed, a c squared, and a c. So they all have a c in common. So we're going to put a c with the 7, and we want the smallest c. So c cubed, c squared, and remember this is like c to the first. So c to the first is the only thing we're going to take there. And then if you look, you have a d in this middle term and a d on the last term, but you don't have a d with the first one. So our greatest common factor is just 7c. And if you want to check to see if you're right, you can go and you can multiply it back out and make sure you get what you started with. So 7c times c squared is 7c to the third. 7c times negative 4cd, so negative 28 c squared d. And 7c times 5d to the third would be 35cd cubed. So there's our final answer. Okay, so try the next problem on your own. Pause it, try it, and then come back and check yourself. So we have 8x minus 56x cubed. So let's start with finding our greatest common factor for our coefficients, which would be 8 and 56. So factors of 8 are 1, 2, 4, and 8. Factors of 56 are 1, 2, 4, 7, 8, 14, 28, and 56. So it looks like our greatest common factor here would be 8. And then check your variables. So they both have an x, and the smallest x would just be this x to the first. So plain old 8x. And check yourself to see if you're right. So 8x times 1 is 8x. 8x times 7x squared is negative 7x squared is negative 56x to the third. So there's your final answer. So last example, we have 7x minus 9y plus 12. So let's start with our greatest common factor on our coefficients. So factors of 7 are 1 and 7. That's from the 7x. The next one we have a 9 from the negative 9y. So 1, 3, and 9. And then we have a 12. So factors of 12 are 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12. So our greatest common factor here is 1. 1's the only thing they all have in common. So now let's look at our variables. So we have an x, we have a y, and here on the last term we don't even have a variable. So that means they don't have any variables in common. So since your greatest common factor is just a 1, that means that we can't factor this. So we're going to say that this one is prime.